Also, this football. We're talking NFL football, UEFA Champions League football, and Big Ten football. Paramount Plus streams all three in one football-y place. Football, 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 and soccer. I mean football. So whatever football you football, stream your football on Paramount Plus.
It works like this. Every language uses certain letters more frequently than others.
Lost Wyoming Medicaid? Healthcare.gov is here for you. With the new law, 4 out of 5 customers can find a plan for $10 or less per month with financial help. Healthcare.gov is here for you. Enroll today for coverage starting the 1st of next month.
Everything's twisted.
Just let me know.
Right outside the United States Capitol lies the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency. The building was completed back in 1961, but a major overhaul in the late 1980s led to the creation of this courtyard right here. To enhance the aesthetics of the new facility, the CIA commissioned a local artist named Jim Sanborn to decorate the courtyard as well as the west entrance with some artwork. By early 1990, the first glimpse of this artwork appeared in an article by the Washington Post. In the background lies a large sheet of metal, perforated by multiple rows of letters. It was some sort of code, a secret message that, according to had been concealed by at least 2 different ciphers. In late June, the 4 copper plates upon which the code had been inscribed were installed in the northwest corner of the courtyard. The sculpture attracted immediate attention from CIA cryptanalysts who organized a sweepstake for someone to crack the code. But despite their best efforts, the code remained intact. Being located at the heart of the agency meant the sculpture was off limits to the public. A private dedication ceremony was held in early November, but it wasn't until March the following year that images of the complete installation began trickling out to the masses. It starts with 3 granite and copper plate constructions placed near the west entrance. One of the slabs features a compass rose pointing towards a naturally magnetized rock known as a lodestone. Furthermore, strings of Morse code can be found on flat sheets of copper interlaced with the stonework. Moving through the atrium and into the courtyard, we're greeted by a shallow pond flanked by 2 featureless slabs of granite. No codes nor markings to speak of in these 2. Finally, we reach the main attraction, a curved screen of copper with hundreds of punched-out letters supported by a trunk of petrified wood. The screen encircles a small fountain surrounded by 2 boulders. There are 1,736 characters in total, which can be divided into 2 parts. The left side is the ciphertext containing the secret message, while the right side is what's known as a visionaire table. The table offered a major clue for how the ciphertext was meant to be solved, because a visionaire table is typically used in combination with a visionaire cipher. Not only that, but Sanborn revealed in early interviews that the upper half of the ciphertext had indeed been encoded using a visionaire cipher. It works like this. We start by writing down an alphabet. The most obvious would be the English alphabet of 26 letters, but Sanborn did something a bit different. He used what's known as a keyed alphabet. Basically, you select a keyword and move the letters of that word to the front of the alphabet. In Sanborn's case, he used the keyword kryptos, stemming from an ancient Greek word for hidden. Okay, so we move the K to the front, followed by the R, then the Y, P, T, O, and S. This keyed alphabet is then repeated underneath the first, but shifted 1 letter to the left. So it starts with the letter R, and the K is moved to the end. The next alphabet is shifted once more, so it starts with Y and ends with R. This process is repeated all the way down until we end up with 26 rows and 26 columns for each letter in the alphabet. Alright, so that's how you construct a visionaire table using the keyword kryptos. Now, the text on the sculpture is a bit different. In addition to the table, Sanborn added 2 index rows and a column composed of the standard English alphabet. These indices are sometimes added for convenience, as it can simplify the encryption and decryption process, but they're not strictly necessary. Furthermore, these 4 columns in the beginning have been repeated at the end here like so. This repetition has no impact on the encryption or decryption process, so they might have been added for aesthetic reasons to symmetrize the left and right side of the sculpture. You may have also noticed this rather conspicuous L off to the side here, but we'll get to that one later in the video. All we have to care about right now is the actual visionary table, which is this part in the middle. Okay, so let's now use this table to encrypt a message. Something simple like, say, secret message. I know, I have a creative mind like the world has never seen. The first thing we need is another keyword. Let's say the keyword is hidden. Because secret message is longer than hidden, we simply repeat the keyword until it matches the length of the plaintext above. Once that's done, we're now ready to encrypt. The first letter of the plaintext is S, so we find the row that starts with S in the visionary table. The first letter of the keystream is H, so we find the column that starts with H. The letter at which this row and column intersect is the first letter of the ciphertext. In this case, that letter is Q. The second letter pair is E and I, so we find the row that starts with E and the column that starts with I, which intersect on the letter K, making K the second letter of the ciphertext. By repeating this process for all the letter pairs, we end up with a ciphertext that looks like this. That's it. That's how you encrypt a message using a visionary cipher. Likewise, by following these steps in reverse, you'd be able to decrypt the message. But as you can imagine, that only works if we know the keyword. Without that keyword, which functions very much like a password, it becomes significantly more difficult to crack the code. This is the situation that those taking a stab at cryptos found themselves in back in the early 1990s. They were faced by this wall of ciphertext, and the only person who knew the keyword was Jim Sanborn. For the next decade or so, both professional and amateur cryptanalysts took turns at solving cryptos without success. The occasional mention would pop up on various discussion forums and chat rooms, but otherwise, cryptos quickly faded from public consciousness. Even Sanborn himself later admitted he kind of forgot about cryptos as he went to work in other projects. But all that changed on June 8, 1999, when a computer scientist from Southern California named Jim Galogli announced that he had finally broken through. Galogli was a former president of the American Cryptogram Association and used some bespoke software on his top-of-the-line Intel Pentium 2 home computer to brute force solutions to cryptos in just 4 days. Except Galogli was unable to crack the entire code. He discovered that Sanborn had divided the ciphertext into 4 distinct segments. Galogli managed to solve the first 3, known as K1, K2, and K3, but K4, comprising the final 97 characters, refused to budge. Not only that, but when he called the CIA's Office of Public Affairs, Galogli was informed that the technical analyst by the name of David Stein had beaten him to the punch. Equipped with nothing but pencil and paper and minimal knowledge of cryptology, Stein had spent the better part of a decade tinkering away at cryptos before finally cracking the code in early 1998. Weirdly enough, this was reported as early as November of that year, many months before Galogli made his announcement, yet barely anyone seems to have noticed. Nevertheless, Stein had likewise been stumped by K4 and only managed to solve the first 3 sections. But as it turns out, Stein was not the first to solve it either. In the wake of Galogli's announcement, it came to light that members of the National Security Agency had secretly solved K1 through K3 all the way back in 1992. Few details were given at the time, but their efforts were later outlined in a series of declassified documents, so let's now take a look at how the NSA partially solved cryptos. Sometime in late 1991, a group of NSA cryptanalyst interns were given a tour of CIA headquarters. They took an immediate interest in cryptos and, upon returning to NSA headquarters, formed a small study group to try and crack the code. While the ciphertext is composed of 865 letters, there are also 4 question marks. The assumption made by members of the study group was that the question marks divided the code into 5 segments. But after a few days of trying, this assumption failed to yield results. They wrote of one segment that it seemed to be a completely random system that would be very difficult to break and had no idea how to approach K4. As if placing a curse upon all future code breakers, they wrote, "This part may be unbreakable." About a year later, in early November 1992, the CIA officially challenged the NSA to solve cryptos. The challenge was accepted by 4 veteran cryptanalysts who began making headway almost immediately. Unlike the previous group, they ignored the question marks and instead turned their attention to something known as frequency analysis. It works like this. Every language uses certain letters more frequently than others. In English, the most frequent letter is E, while letters like X, Q, and Z are among the least common. So if we count the letters in a piece of English text, like, say, the beginning of the Wikipedia article about cryptography, again, creative masterminded work here, we'd expect to find a lot more E's, T's, and A's than B's, Z's, and K's. Sure enough, that's exactly what we find. 42 E's and not a single K. The beauty of this approach is that it works even if the letters are scrambled. After all, we're only interested in the frequency of letters, not their positions. So even if we turn our Wikipedia sample into gibberish by rearranging the letters, we still get the exact same result, hinting that this text was originally written in English. In cryptology speak, this method of encryption is known as transposition. A transposition cipher will transpose or move characters around, but otherwise leave them unchanged. It differs from a substitution cipher, which, as the name suggests, can substitute or replace characters. We've already seen an example of this with the Vigenère cipher, where letters are supplanted by new ones according to a Vigenère table. This substitution of letters will often render frequency analysis far less useful, if not outright ineffective. Alright, back to cryptos. What the NSA cryptanalysts did was to simply count all the letters in each row of the crypto ciphertext. Once they were done, they found that rows 15 through 25 produced a frequency count that strongly resembled English. Notice, for instance, how there are plenty of E's and T's, but not a single J nor Z. In other words, this middle portion of cryptos had probably been encoded using a transposition cipher, while the rows above and below had probably been encoded using a substitution cipher. By this point, the NSA team assumed the ciphertext had been divided into 3 segments and felt pretty confident this upper portion was the Vigenère cipher, as Sanborn himself had publicly stated. So the next logical step was to try and suss out the keyword. There are a few different ways to go about this, but a common one is to exploit certain repeating patterns left behind by the encoding process. Remember how in a previous example the keyword hidden was repeated until it matched the length of the plaintext? Well, that repetition can reveal information about the length of the keyword. Imagine we wanted to encode the message "ideal concealment of many documents" using the keyword mystery. The resulting ciphertext would look like this. Notice how the string EAL becomes WTP both here and here. Likewise, the string MENT becomes DCZR both here and here. This only happens when there's an alignment of letters in both the plaintext and the key stream below. ENS becomes W, ENS becomes W, MNR becomes D, MNR becomes D, and so on. In other words, identical pairings will always produce the same letter. So imagine now that we only had the ciphertext. We'd quickly notice the repetitions of the letters WTP and DCZR. We could then measure the distance between these repetitions. Okay, so there are 7 letters between the beginnings of these two, and 14 letters between the beginnings of these two. This strongly implies the length of the keyword is 7. And sure enough, the keyword mystery is 7 letters long. Fortunately for the NSA team, repetitions like these were indeed present in the crypto ciphertext. Take this one for instance. The beginnings of these 2 identical strings are separated by 8 letters. This meant the keyword was probably 8 letters long, or possibly a factor of 8. So the keyword had a length of 8, 4, 2, or 1. But 8 was still the most probable, as a 4-letter keyword or below would likely have been a bit too easy to crack. By this point, the NSA team could have just run the ciphertext through a program and checked it against all 8-letter words in an English dictionary. But Sanborn could theoretically have used a random jumble of letters or a word of his own invention, so they opted for a different approach. First, they evened out the rows like so and divided the ciphertext into 8-letter chunks. This way, they could be certain that every 8th ciphertext letter had been enciphered using the same keyword letter. For instance, imagine that the keyword was obscured. The first letter of that keyword is O, so every 8th ciphertext letter must have been enciphered using the letter O. This means that if the same letter appears at intervals of 8 in the ciphertext, like say the letter R, here, 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 and a few more times, we have these identical pairings I mentioned before. We have RO, RO, RO all the way down, which means all of these R's must represent the same letter in the plaintext. And that's the key to breaking the cipher. Knowing that certain letters represent the same letter in the plaintext makes the cipher vulnerable to frequency analysis. After all, if all these R's represent the same letter, and the same is true of all the other letters in the ciphertext, we can just count all the letters. The letters with high frequency counts probably represent letters like E and T, while letters with low frequency counts probably represent letters like Q and Z. And so that's what the NSA team did. They counted a bunch of letters, tried different combinations, until eventually they found something that began to resemble English. For instance, at one point they ended up with this, and noticed the words 6, 5, and 7 appear to be forming near the end here. All that was left to do was guessing the remaining letters, and just like that, the first portion of Cryptos had been solved. It's a bit difficult to see when the text is lumped together like this, but if we add some spacing between the words, it becomes a lot more readable. We'll examine this plain text in a moment, but first we need to address this mess at the top. What the NSA team discovered was that rows 3 through 14 had been enciphered using one keyword, while the two uppermost rows had been enciphered using a different keyword. In other words, the crypto ciphertext was actually composed of 4 distinct segments, not 3 as initially assumed. So the portion they solved first was actually the second segment, which would later become known as K2. Alright, once K2 had been unlocked, they immediately set their sights on K3. As previously mentioned, frequency analysis indicated K3 had been encoded using a transposition cipher, so a substitution cipher like the one used to encode K2 was definitely off the table. While there are many different kinds of transposition ciphers, they often rely upon some sort of matrix. For instance, imagine we wanted to conceal the plain text "This is a secret message." We would then pick a keyword like cloaked and write down the message in a grid or matrix like so. Then we assign a number to each letter in the keyword based on their alphabetical order, so A, C, D, E, K, L, O. Then we rearrange the columns in numerical order. Finally, we write down the letters in each column to generate the ciphertext. Fairly simple stuff. But that simplicity is also the weakness of a cipher like this one, because you can sort of guess your way to a solution with a lot of patience, a bit of luck, and some know-how. And that's precisely what the NSA team did. They quickly noticed there's only one Q in the entire K3 ciphertext. They also knew that plenty of English words that begin with Q are followed by a U, and there were only 5 U's. So they simply took the Q along with a few letters before and after and wrote them down as a column. Then they did the same with the 5 U's and placed them next to the first column. Some of the letter combinations were problematic, like YY and HH, which would be unlikely to show up in an English word. But other columns looked more promising, like the HE in this pair of columns, which could be the end of the most common word of all. So they tried a few T columns, followed by some more columns, and a few more columns, and that was pretty much it. They eventually recovered the entire plaintext through nothing more than educated guesswork. In fact, the assumption that Q would be followed by a U proved to be wrong, but they still managed to find a solution. They also realized that the last 4 characters were actually part of K4 rather than K3. Alright, so that was K3 unlocked, on to K1. The reason the NSA team tackled K3 ahead of K1 is because the latter was only 63 characters long. Generally speaking, the shorter the ciphertext, the more difficult it is to break. Fortunately, the K1 ciphertext was just another Visionaire cipher. All they had to do was repeat the steps taken to solve K2, and eventually they recovered the entire K1 plaintext, which reads as follows.
Between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of occlusion.
Moving on to the K2 plaintext, it reads like this.
It was totally invisible. How's that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field, X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should, it's buried out there somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north, 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. ID by Rose.
Finally, we have the K3 plaintext, which reads as follows.
Slowly, desperately slowly, the remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed with trembling hands. I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, and then widening the hole a little, I inserted a candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker, but presently, details of the room within emerged from the mist. X. Can you see anything, Q?
Alright, so what the hell does any of that mean? Well, something that immediately stands out is how all three segments include exactly one misspelled word. In K1, the first L in illusion has been replaced with a Q. In K2, the O in underground has been supplanted by a U. In K3, the word desperately is missing the third E and has had the second E substituted for an A. The prevailing belief within the cryptos community is that these typos are deliberate. They're typically perceived as some sort of clue, and Sanborn has indeed implied or outright stated that that's the case on multiple occasions.
Now, it could be illusion with a Q, but it's a very telling phrase as far as an artist's ability to make a code. It's a clue. It is what it is.
However, Sanborn has also made statements where it almost sounds like he's only pretending as though the typos were deliberate.
Why did you put deliberate misspellings in some of the clues? That's an ancient tool for making codes more difficult to crack. Saying I was sloppy is a good way of saying it. I didn't take tremendous care in what's been deciphered already, because it was... If you want to say it's intentional, because it makes it harder. It's unpredictable. Unpredictability is one of the strengths of difficult code, and I wanted to be as unpredictable as possible.
Looking at the overall meaning of the plaintext, it's, well, difficult to parse, and according to Sanborn, that's very much by design.
They will be able to read what I wrote, but what I wrote is a mystery itself. There's still things they have to discover once it's deciphered. There are things in there they will never discover the true meaning of. People will always say, what did he mean by that? What I wrote out were clues to a larger mystery.
The K1 plaintext is very short, but seems to be alluding to shadows and how they're illusions formed by the absence of light. Light and shadow is a common theme in Sanborn's topography, so perhaps some sort of pattern will form when the sculpture is struck by sunlight at just the right angle, or something to that effect.
There are encoding systems which use pattern, light and shadow, and it's those kinds of systems that I was most interested in using because I'm an artist.
The K2 plaintext is a bit more straightforward by plainly stating that something was buried at these coordinates, which point to a location a few meters south of the sculpture. But in 2013, Sanborn apparently confirmed that what he buried at this location has since been removed. According to a summary of a post-convention dinner attended by Sanborn, the item was a bronze geodetic survey marker made by the United States Geological Survey. They're typically used for things like topography and measuring the distance between locations. That being said, it sounds like the survey marker was only meant to elucidate the meaning of the final plaintext rather than offer clues for deciphering the code.
Do you have to be on the CIA grounds in order to solve cryptos? No. So just by reading the text taken from cryptos and posted online, you can solve the puzzle. Well, yeah, that doesn't mean that what I've said in the piece doesn't do something physically there at the agency. You have to decipher the piece and then go to the agency and find that place.
Looking at the rest of the K2 plaintext, it makes reference to something invisible and using the Earth's magnetic field. This could be alluding to a compass, which in turn could be a reference to the compass rose etched into the stonework by the west entrance. The remaining portions seem to be about the survey marker. It was buried or transmitted into the ground at an unknown location, followed by the coordinates of that location. Furthermore, Langley is a nickname for the CIA because it's based out of Langley, Virginia, and Sanborn has confirmed that WW is a reference to former CIA Director William Webster. Sanborn once said the K2 plaintext was meant to look like an interrupted radio transmission. It's not uncommon for the letter X to denote periods in radio communications, and Sanborn has confirmed that that is indeed what the multiple X's sprinkled throughout the plaintext are meant to represent. The only real question mark surrounding the K2 plaintext is this final sentence, ID by Rose, but we'll circle back to that one in a moment. The K3 plaintext is a lot easier to parse because it's just an extract from the 1923 book The Tomb of Tutankhamun. It recounts the moment British archaeologist Howard Carter stumbled upon the tomb of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Sanborn later explained that he included this passage because he wanted to instill in the solvers of cryptos a semblance of the exhilaration experienced by the Egyptologists. The only thing that doesn't make much sense about the K3 plaintext is this final Q. It's not in the source text and it just looks out of place. Some have speculated it's a reference to a character like Q in the James Bond franchise or the godlike Q in Star Trek because it sounds like the question is addressed to someone named Q. Sanborn did once briefly reference Star Trek in an interview, but It doesn't sound like he's the kind of person to include a pop culture reference in his work. The NSA cryptanalysts were able to solve K1 through K3 in as little as 2 days, although some documents suggest it took them at least a month. But despite their best efforts, the final 97 characters proved too much of a challenge.
Given the suspected cryptography, the last section is too short to solve without diverting a great deal of effort from operational problems.
After Jim Galogli's independent solution received widespread media attention in 1999, thousands more joined the fray and began tinkering away at K4. But in spite of this renewed interest, the final 97 characters have resisted all attempts at decipherment.
This is the Google Pixel 9, and this is your family leaving the photo you just took, taking your phone, and adding you. So now you have a picture from the family vacation with the whole family.
Add new sweet and smoky Chipotle to your wing lineup.
U.S. General's top-rated cards provide advanced features at an incredible value, only at Harbor Freight.
With so many choices on Booking.com, there are so many Tina Feys I could be. So I hired body doubles.
Indoorsy Tina loves a deluxe suite.
Ooh. Booking.com, Booking.yeah.
As indicated by the NSA, part of what makes K4 so difficult is its length. At 97 characters, it's the second shortest segment behind K1. On the bright side, K1 was eventually solved, so it's not like K4 is prohibitively short. I mean, it's not like it's literally unbreakable. Wait, it is possible to solve, right? It's a question that invariably shows up in any discussion about cryptos. What if Sanborn just threw together a bunch of random letters at